When in the middle of a heated exchange or some difficult conversation, most people struggle with remaining calm enough to deliver smart arguments. As a result, their relationships at work may become much more complicated, and they might lose the respect of the people who really matter in their lives. But in this video, I wanted to share with you how did I personally bypass this problem and how I could better take control of any heated argument whenever I found myself in one. So in the past, to acknowledge having been quite vulnerable on those topics, I was always the one people easily take advantage of in any shape or form you might think about. When arguing specifically with one person in my family, but even in general, I could never stand up for myself, I could not hold a strong stance, and I was always kind of leaving the conversation way more angry than I thought I was. And in any case, way more angry than when the discussion started. But I didn't really know how to process that. And it was happening simply because every time that person or somebody I was arguing with had this one line, this one phrase I didn't know how to respond to, that was shutting down my brain. It was happening all the time. They said one thing and I was kind of retrieving into myself because somehow the words were not coming to me anymore. After some reflection, and from what I can say today, reflecting on those old situations, the reason this was happening was mostly because of a lack of self-honesty, of emotional maturity. I was never really acknowledging how much anger I had built up inside, or even fear, or whatever you want to put in here. I was never really honest with myself on how affected I had been by what any person had said. It was touching me a lot. I was quite low self-esteem also back then and quite vulnerable, but I never really wanted to acknowledge that. I always wanted to pretend it was okay. No, it's not affecting me. It was. It definitely was deep down. And because of that lack of emotional maturity, of emotional self-honesty, I was never able to know how to respond in a heated conversation, because what happens when you repress too many emotions is that at some point you don't really know anymore what you feel. If a psychotherapist asks you, what do you feel about this? You don't even know. You're going to say, well, nothing, because you do have feelings as a human being, but if you have repressed them for too long, you don't even know anymore what you feel. And as a result, when somebody makes one comment or says one thing that is touching those vulnerable feelings you have repressed for too long, then you don't know what to respond, because you have blocked so much the access to your own feelings that when somebody is tickling that down below, then you are like, oh, this mechanism of repressing everything kicks back, and you're like, because you're not used to investigate on what is really happening down there. So the brain basically shuts down to avoid all of those feelings to come back, to come out. And that's how you get locked in a conversation, or just lose the argument, or on the reverse, if it goes out way too much, and you're like exploding in the conversation, but that is not productive either to find a compromise when it is somebody you have to negotiate with in some way. On the reverse, what I can say today is that it seems like I always know what to say to de-escalate the conflict, like literally all the time, and I don't even know how to position myself before the conflict arises. Not talking about physical space, but sometimes also, but in the conversation, what type of argument do I go into and which ones do I just not go into? Because I know from experience and intuitively that this one thing, if I say that, it's going to skyrocket the conflict, whereas this thing, not at all. And at some point when it became intuitive for me, I thought it was just intuitive for everyone, and then I saw some of my friends still being trapped into those endless arguments and those endless conflicts, and I realized though they were making the mistakes that I could witness earlier, and they were falling into the traps that I was not falling into anymore. And curiously, on my end, it even ended up like just being nonverbal. Now, even from just my nonverbal standpoint, I can make people shut up at sometimes. That even happened more and more recently in the last months. I noticed that more and more, if I want somebody to shut up, I sometimes don't even need to speak out. I'm not even sure how I do that, but I will have some behavior that will let them understand, now you're done. That happened over time, and as a result, I am not a victim of anyone anymore, and I don't really allow the person to lead me into any place emotionally that I haven't already been myself. And that is where the whole secret lies. Because once you have learned, therefore, to put words on what you felt, what you feel, and once you have unlocked again the connection between your brain, your logical mind, and your feelings, then no one can really trigger you anymore because you have processed whatever had to be processed. When you can acknowledge that you do feel a lot of anger about this person, you don't have to be guilty about the anger, you don't have to pretend it's okay. And before saying anything, it has to be processed inside. Once it is processed inside, then yes, you can say whatever you have to say to this person, because it will come with the right threshold of emotional charge. Any argument, any sentence that comes with too much emotional charge will usually escalate the conflict, because if the person is not more mature emotionally than you are, then they will connect with their own hurt feelings, their own wounds, and it is just going to be a mess. When it comes on your end from a mature emotional processing, you have acknowledged what you felt, you have released it, then you can say anything that will hit the point without escalating the conflict. And because I got better at figuring out what I was feeling in response to what somebody said and how do I want to respond to this person, that improved acuity in my brain also allowed me to introduce more open loops in the conversation, or pacifying language. The kind of language you will use when you will say, okay, I'm going to say something that you may get mad about. Do you want to hear it? When you start like this, everyone wants to hear it, and everyone will at least let you finish, because you have pre-framed their mind so that they are actually willing to listen. But how to know? How to know when to use those small phrases and when to avoid them because it is completely useless? That comes down to this emotional acuity, tailoring your intuition to the person in front of you. If you want to learn specifically how to do that, I have prepared a series of lessons down below, you can find on the first link on the description, that will teach you how to, first of all, release all of those blocked emotions in a healthy way, not trying to just pretend you're okay when you're not, releasing them on your own. You don't have to spit out at the face of anybody. You just release on your own with some techniques I will show you there, and then you can tailor your language to the person in front of you, measuring what type of personality do they have, and depending on what profile do they fall into, how to adapt the conversation to them specifically. A narcissist will not be handled in the same way as somebody who is just slightly passive-aggressive because they had a bad day. Those two people need a completely different response, and unless you have figured out who you had in front of you, it is almost impossible to figure out the best way to respond in a heated exchange, especially when the conversation is about something about you. Those are the most difficult ones. You will also find in there 5 of the best phrases I use as rebuttals to open loops in the conversation. When I notice the person is too emotionally involved or like agitated, doesn't let me speak, what kind of small phrases do I use to always temper down their emotional state and allow them the mental capacity to allow me to finish what I had to say. From there, you can have a mature conversation, explain anything you had to explain from a mature standpoint, and those are usually better methods to create better connections at work, in your family, anywhere, rather than just yelling at each other and trying to hit each other, strike back with some even more mean comment. Those things never really work, at least not on the long term. So if you want to figure out how to accomplish all of those things, you have the link down below and waiting for you to join me there. I tell you, thank you for watching and see you soon in the next video.